Welcome to the Phat Games Podcast, Episode 1, Part 1. In this episode, Gary and I talk about the history of our current game in development, Kids of Karendow. Stay tuned at the end for Kids of Karendow Radio, where we will play one of the songs from the game. Hi everyone, welcome to the Phat Games Podcast. This is our first episode ever. We are doing this podcast to promote our game that is currently in development. That game is called Kids of Karendow. My name is Blair. I do most of the development for the game, some of the artwork. I'm originally actually from Canada. I live in New York now. With me today, and also my co-host on this awesome podcast, hopefully, is Gary. Gary, you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi there. My name's Gary. I do almost none of the development, artwork, and story writing, and all that kind of good stuff that you talked about. For all our old fans that have played the original Kids of Karendow, they may know me as Grooven, but my real name is Gary, and that's what I just kind of go by now. So I am the resident kind of music guy of Phat Games. I've been pretty much had that role since 1993 when we first started Phat Games. What were we called? Lightning Productions back then?
We originally called ourselves Lightning Productions, and then we went with that really gothic name, Beyond Darkness, and then we became Phat Kids, and then Phat Kids Enterprises, and then Phat Games. And we kept Phat Games all these years. How long has it been? Let me do math, Gary. 20.
I don't know. I think we've been Phat Games since the year 2000.
We were Phat Games when we started on the Phat Professional Burglar, the precursor to Burglar's Bounty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I think we've changed names a lot less times than we've changed logos, though. So that's
true. Yeah. Yes. We never really got comfortable with that. So, what are you drinking, Gary?
I'm actually drinking my favorite rum. This is El Dorado. Comes from a place called Guyana. And I have a buddy that's actually from that area, so he's the one that introduced me to this rum.
And I am drinking Brocheck Dark. There, we got a free ad for all the 0 people who are going to watch this.
That is your favorite beer, isn't it? I think every time I see you, that's like your go-to beer.
It is definitely my favorite beer. So what was the original Kids of Karendow, Gary?
What was it?
Yeah, what was it?
I don't know. That's kind of a loaded question, but it was the first. Well, actually, it wasn't the first. It was the second, as you're probably going to correct me. Our first RPG we ever created was Holy Conquest. Right. I don't even know if we even released that game to the world, but we did post it to our old website on GeoCities or wherever, one of the domains we were on. Yeah, totally aging ourselves. So Kids of Karendow was the first RPG that we basically all worked on together. Right. I think most of the games that we worked on prior to that, we all just kind of did it as our own individual projects.
When you say we all, who else are you talking about?
I'm talking about our good friends Phil and Brad, who are also the original part of the Phat Games.
Brad, who is actually my brother, has done some art for this iteration of Kids of Karendow. He's done a couple of the character pieces, and he's done a really good job with them. Phil, on the other hand, unfortunately, hasn't joined us on this journey with this reimagining of Kids of Karendow. So Kids of Karendow is about a group of, in the original DOS version, they were all teenagers. This one, we've increased their age a little bit. They're generally in their early 20s. And they're a group of young adults who are planning on overthrowing their government because their government does do some evil shit. So very early on in the game, you actually find the resistance. You're not immediately a member of it. It's not exactly like Final Fantasy and Cloud being Final Fantasy VII, Cloud being a merc and all that stuff, and just helping out Avalanche or whatever. It's actually, there are parallels to that though, now that I think of it, but it's not quite like that. But anyway, early on in the game, you actually do find the resistance.
Actually, here's a question. Why do we call our game a JRPG?
Well, it's so the Japanese element of an RPG sort of comes from, like, I guess, Phantasy Star and Final Fantasy were generally the first two games that came out that really adapted sort of a Dungeons and Dragons kind of elements into an RPG. However, versus Western-made RPGs, the themes were different because the people, I guess, and I saw this on a YouTube video, some documentary about the differences of the two Western versus Japanese RPGs. But I guess there's a heavy manga influence on Japanese RPGs because the people they hired to create the games were big into that, and they sort of let it come out in the games and the storytelling. Whereas the Western RPGs were more solidly based off things like Dungeons and Dragons. So they made more open world, like when you role play, you are the character in the game. You're not playing another character. And that's sort of where the two genres differ. And I've always been a fan of JRPGs over Western RPGs. I've always thought JRPGs are like watching a great movie or reading a good interactive book or something. And Western RPGs, well, they're better now, but like when they first came out, the story kind of just sucked, and it didn't work for me.
I've always liked both, but like I do get where you're coming from. Like I find with a lot of, I guess, Western style RPGs, like when you play through it, you don't actually get much story. A lot of it kind of relies on you kind of going around exploring the open world and like reading books. So it's kind of up to you how immersed into the world that you want to get.
Yeah, and I think exploration is, and like the exploration you do can be interesting, but I also like the exploration to be like an extra thing you do to a well thought out sort of story that is largely on rails, but it's extra stuff you can do. But I think the focus in the Western RPGs is the exploration and building your own world, and that didn't appeal to me as much, and then that never really has.
Oh, okay.
Probably one of the reasons I never played all the way through Breath of the Wild. It didn't really engage me enough because, I mean, it was still a Zelda game. They still had their 4 dungeons and all that stuff, and but it was really hard, harder than any other Zelda game.
The thing about Zelda games is that there isn't really much story, right? I guess like nothing all the games. Like there's the main plot. You go and save the princess from Ganon or whatever.
Yeah, and they generally reuse that plot over and over and over and over again. That's true.
And there's elements where like I'm fine with that. It's like the Zelda games are usually very, very well crafted and very, very fun.
Oh yeah, they are.
Yeah, like for me, I like a good story. I like a good, I like good characters and stuff, and that's what I think Kids of Karendow is. Right.
Yeah, and on that note, let's talk a little more about Kids of Karendow. Talk about what we're doing with the story and the characters, because if anyone who's watching this has played the original DOS version, there was a lot of crude kind of early or mid-90s South Park style humor. I don't know. I know South Park is...
I had nothing to do with that, by the way. I had nothing to do with any of the dialogue in the original game.
Right.
Just get that out there.
Yeah, and that's fair, Gary, that you said that, because there is some shit in there that I've gone back and looked at and be like, holy shit, I can't believe we did that.
There's a lot of jokes in that did not read very well either, right?
No, absolutely not. I mean, some of it was very much a product of its time, and a lot of it goes for shock value versus actually adding to the story. And actually, in that original one, the story, I think, was secondary.
It totally was.
And yeah, and that's not going to be the case in this one. I mean, there's still going to be some humor. It's not going to be quite as low. I mean, no, it's not going to be quite as lowbrow. There's some stuff we've already done in the first hour of the game. But, it's definitely...
I definitely don't want to take the humor away from the game, but I definitely don't want it to be just totally trashy like we in the early game.
Oh, and it's absolutely not. I mean,
we put one of our best friends into the game, the original game, and we made him this like retard guy, I guess.
Probably not the appropriate way to put it now, but he was differently abled. And we had a whole skit of the game. This would totally get us canceled today. Like there was a whole story sequence around it where you basically had to beat him up, and this was like I played this part of the game a few years ago, and I was mortified that we put this in the game as an adult. I'm like, this is just not cool. And today that would totally get us canceled. Now we're probably perking everyone's interest because they want to go play the old one and see this horrible thing we did. And on that note, if you do want to play the old game, it is in archive.org, Kids of Karendow, Chapter 1, The Dawn of Revolution. I do not endorse what we did back then. We were kids. That is my disclaimer.
And as I mentioned before, I had nothing to do with the dialogue. All I did was the music, and I might have made like a couple tools, and that was it.
When we first started our reboot or reimagining of Kids of Karendow, I was playing around with the art style, because for Burgle's Bounty we did very sort of hand-drawn, colored pencil / pencil crayons, depending which country you live in and what you call them. Art style to it, and it worked. It was actually, the artwork for Burgle's Bounty received a lot of positive feedback. So I was exploring maybe doing more of that for this version of Kids of Karendow. So the first month I was trying to figure out what we want to do for the art style. And then I ended up taking this like colored pencil artwork of Elmo, the main character in the game, and shrinking him down basically into these pixel art. I think I maybe applied a pixelation filter to it. I can't really remember. And then it's like, actually, I think that looks better than the colored pencil version. So I animated it. I gave it some frames of animation, and you probably saw this. It's actually on our Twitter account, the Kids of Karendow Twitter account. And I mean, I liked it. But then instead of doing that, I actually went back to the Kids of Karendow Chapter 2 artwork, which we still have, and I took Brad's artwork from that. And the thing is, though, each character was only designed with 16 frames of animation back then. That's not going to cut it today. So
so how many do you have now for Elmo?
So Elmo has about 70 and climbing. Telly has more just because of the helmet thing, deployment thing that we do with him. Misha is 70. I can't remember how many Eamon has, but it's all around that. So all the characters, I think it's easy to say, it's safe to say that between 70 and 100 frames of animation. Gary, you've said that Elmo is probably one of the most memorable lead characters in a JRPG that you've seen.
Yeah, it is for me.
I think so,
but
too.
I could be really biased just because Elmo has been with me for
we're not biased.
The better part of like 20 years.
Yeah, I mean,
Telly has gone through a lot of changes. I think in the original games he had a cap.
Yeah. So what I did to make Kids of Karendow a little more woke. So the original Kids of Karendow had one female lead protagonist, and that was Eamon. And then in that game, we also had Prime Minister Shout. And again, we weren't really great. There was definitely the 90s. There was some stuff that would probably not be considered acceptable today in how we represented the women characters in the game. So we're doing better in this version. We've actually, I think there's probably equal number of women cast members as there are men in this, and then there's things that aren't even human in this game. There's Eamon, she's returning to this game, but we're replacing Bogman, who is this wizard character in the first game, with his daughter, and we're calling her Misha. And we're also diversifying the cast. I mean, every single lead in the game that wasn't a robot or an abattoir was white. So we've cleaned that up. There's far more diversity in the cast in terms of skin color, and definitely in background. We're doing our LGBT representation with Telly. And I actually like Telly's backstory. It was the best, even more than the lead character in this version.
I think what we have planned, it's going to be good once we tell it.
Yeah, it's gonna be dark, not funny, just very dark, very emotional, probably triggering. But that's what we want. We want people to feel uncomfortable when they see this, but also recognize that bad things happen in the real world, and we're not going to shy away from that in the way we tell the story.
It's kind of very interesting, just because Telly in the original game, he was just kind of like, just a random shit talker, and we didn't really know too much about him other than that.
Yeah, well, we didn't do a good job in developing most of the characters in the original. Elmo got some development. Actually, I would say that Grim got some development too. And Grim won't have a huge appearance in this game either. It's actually, there is, the characters, I mean, Telly is, I think, safe to say, he's an entirely different character that just shares the same name and weapon. And there's similar aspects to him. Is that fair to say?
No, I would just say we just carved him out a little bit more.
Okay, we definitely developed him more.
Like
Eamon gets a lot more development. Misha is a whole different character.
Didn't have too much depth in the original game, so we could have went any direction with him, really.
Yeah, and spoiler alert, you do get to play as King Karendow's daughter in this game. She wasn't a character in the original, and there's a large section of the game where you play as her, and that should be interesting as well. So because we want to tell the other side of the story a little bit as well, the good guys and the bad guys.
Yeah, I think I like how both Karendow and Creep are going to be really fleshed out in this game. I think that'll be really interesting to see.
Yeah. So we renamed Creep Kelvius, and so for those of you who don't know the original, King Karendow had kind of like this viceroy guy named Creep in the original. We called him Kelvius.
It's like this mysterious hooded figure.
Yeah.
Kind of that.
This one, this one we actually developed him and talked about his background and who he is and why he becomes this dark figure. And he is the main villain in the game. Spoiler alert. Am I giving too much away, Gary?
No, really. I think it was always Creep was kind of like.
He was always supposed to be the main villain.
He was always kind of like the central figure of, I guess, the bad side. I guess that's what you want to call it.
Well, we didn't go into that much in the in Karendow 1.
Yeah, but you know what? But we would have in Chapter 2.
Yeah, Chapter 2.
Just remind me again why that didn't go through again.
Why we didn't finish Chapter 2?
Yeah.
I don't know. We're all in school. We gave up on it.
That was why we went to school, and then real life happened, and then that was it.
Hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Also ring the bell icon to get notifications of future videos. Please follow us on social media. The links are in the description below. Finally, every Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, tune into our Twitch to see us stream Kids of Karendow development.